Hello, my name is Nkechi.
Hello, my name is Abby.
And welcome to WAMV.
We have lots of stories to cover today, so let's get going.
Our first story is about the Titanic. Let's hope it's not a total shipwreck.
Hello, people of Earth. My name is Braden, and I will tell you about the Titanic. The Titanic was called the RMS Titanic. It was the biggest ship to ever set sail. The length was 883 feet. The captain was Captain Edward J. Smith. It sailed 100 years ago. It was built in Belfast on March 31st, 1909 by builders Harland and Wolff. It took 2 years to build. The Titanic held 3,547 people. The other ships were RMS Olympic and HMS Brentnick and were of similar size. The Titanic took 62 minutes to set sail. 2 ships had to pull out of the dock because it was so big. The Titanic hit an iceberg and 1,003 people died and 703 people survived. The reason it sunk was because it hit the iceberg. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the ship to sink. The Titanic took 5 to 10 minutes to hit the ocean floor. Do you think learning about the Titanic was fun? See you next time on our trip to the Titanic.
Wow, I didn't know that many people died.
At least some people made it out alive.
Well, only 700 people. 3 people survived.
Let's switch to a happier story with Isabel.
This event even has its own movie, right?
Do you like the movie Dolphin Tale or the sequel? Well, I'm here to talk about Hope, the star of the second movie. It all happened when a local fisherman spotted her in shallow waters on December 11th, 2010 in the River Lagoon on the east coast of Florida. She was 2 to 3 months old and weighed 58 pounds. This dolphin was extremely dehydrated, lacking the milk that she should have gotten from her mother. To help with Hope's initial care for formula, they brought her to CMA, which stands for Clearwater Marine Aquarium. Hope is now 6 years old. She likes blowing and playing with bubbles, and water toys especially. Presently, she is still at CMA because they are teaching her how to hunt. Unfortunately, Hope will never be able to identify predators due to her small size. If you want to know more about Hope, watch Dolphin Tale 2. Back to you in the studio, Nkechi and Abby.
It's sad she will never be able to leave the CMA.
Let's move from under the sea to up on land, where Shaylee will tell us all about the mystery of the Stonehenge.
Let's rock this mystery in history.
Good morning, Londonderry. My name is Shaylee, and today I will share information with you about Stonehenge. Did you know that Stonehenge was found in southern England about 4,500 years ago? When people found this, they all had different stories about how Stonehenge was made. Some said that aliens made it or Stone Age people made it, but no one knows how they built it or how they raised stones weighing around 25 tons up 20 feet to the top of another stone. Did you know to move 81 stones it takes 5 years? They might have dug for stones or found stones laying around. Did you know you would need around 1,500 workers and it would take 9 weeks to pull one stone? Stonehenge is made of 81 chunks of blue stone, which would take 100 years to pull. I hope you enjoyed this news report about Stonehenge. Now back to you, Nkechi and Abby.
I didn't know it took that long to move 81 stones.
Yeah, 5 years to move 81 stones?
Now, let's go deep into the woods where we'll find Harriet escaping a plantation.
Hello, I'm Nkechi, and I'm here to tell you about Harriet Tubman's escape from the plantation she grew up in. Harriet didn't like the plantation at all. Who would? The food wasn't good because it was stale, the clothes were basically rags, and she had to work all day with no pay. She was 30 years old when she started to plan her escape. From the Poplar Neck plantation in Maryland, where she worked, she had to pass the Mason-Dixon line to freedom. When she finally convinced her 2 older brothers to escape with her, they got scared and rushed back to the plantation. Now Harriet was all on her own, sneaking through the woods There were so many close calls. For instance, at the beginning of her trip, she was chased by the slave owners' hunting dogs. She knew if she was caught, she would be punished, so she was very sneaky. Harriet finally made it to freedom after a lot of hard labor. Finally, no more working for the slave owners. She could live her life in freedom. But what's interesting about this event is the aftermath of it, because she helped hundreds of slaves get to freedom, and she went back 19 times. She also helped create the Underground Railroad, too, by guiding 300 slaves through it to freedom. I'm happy she was so brave because she helped end slavery. Are you inspired by this feat of greatness? Thank you, and back to you, Abby.
What a daring feat.
Yes, now let's head to Italy, where the terrible tragedy of Pompeii occurred.
We are in the Italian city of Pompeii. I wonder if you know anything about it, because I'm going to tell you all about this beautiful city and how it came to its end. By the way, my name is Abby. First, I will start by describing their clothing. All men, women, and children wore shawls that draped over their shoulders. They were all super long pieces of cloth, and depending on the person's size, like if you were smaller, it would get wrapped around you more. Now onto the food they would have eaten in Pompeii. They didn't have many food options, so they would eat bread, rice, water, and on special occasions, like birthdays or weddings, they would make these fruity tart things, but don't expect them to be good as creamsicles. Next, I'll talk about the houses in Pompeii. They were either huge and beautiful or small and very detailed. Don't they sound so pretty? Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is transportation. They lived so long ago that they didn't have cars, so they rode horses or just walked. Well, next we have schooling. There were no true schools, but parents taught their own children. When the parents taught their kids, they would get called Ludi Magister. Weird. So, on to the next topic. It's the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The Pompeian people were living at the foot of a mountain, or so they thought. It was Vesuvius they were at the foot of. They didn't know it was an active volcano until it was too late. The millions of tons of ash rained down, burying the whole town. 2,000 people were killed. Last but definitely not least, some extra facts. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius was in 79 AD. That's a long time ago. Did you know Vesuvius was the most dangerous volcano ever? Well, I've had a wonderful time talking to you about Pompeii, but it's time to get back to you and catch you. Bye.
Oh, what a horrible end to such a beautiful city.
Last but not least, we have Manny with a story about Hurricane Harvey.
Hi, my name is Manny. I'm going to tell you about Hurricane Harvey. It happened in Texas. The hurricane occurred on August 25th, 2017. The storm was a Category 4 hurricane. Hurricanes have very strong winds and a lot of rain. Hurricanes start over water and then sometimes it moves over land. A Category 1 hurricane has to have winds up to 74 miles per hour. The strongest hurricane is a Category 5 with winds up to 150 miles per hour. Harvey was the strongest hurricane to hit the U.S. since 2005, when Hurricane Wilma hit Florida. The winds were so strong that it pulled off the roofs of people's houses, and the people had to go to places like a gymnasium to sleep. During Hurricane Harvey, about 50 inches of rain fell. Houston, Texas had flooding, and many other cities and towns did too. People had to be evacuated from their homes because of floodings. There were $125 billion worth of damage, such as homes, businesses, cars, and properties. Many people came to help, like the internet star Jake Paul. He is a famous YouTuber. Jake Paul was helping day and night, and other people were too. He went to Houston, Texas with his video crew so he could supply food and other stuff. He came out to help people, cheer people up, and help them rebuild their house. He filled a U-Haul truck to bring supplies and food. He even helped people get out of their houses with boats and jet skis.
Wow, those were all some great stories.
Yes, they were terrific.
This
has been another report from WAMV.
Signing off.
Hello, welcome. I'm Ella.
Hello, I'm Rebecca. Welcome to WLAZ. Let's get to our first story.
First, we have Liam talking about Pearl Harbor.
Hello, I'm your host Liam, and I will be talking to you about what happened in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor is located on an island of Oahu, Hawaii. The Americans were not in World War II yet. Fighting was in Europe and Africa. There was a huge U.S. military base at Pearl Harbor. The Americans were training there in case they joined the war. Japan wanted to take over lands in the Pacific region. The Japanese were preparing to fight in this area. They wanted more power in land. The Americans stopped trading and selling goods with Japan. The Japanese got mad at the Americans because they weren't allowing supplies to get to Japan. On December 7th, the Americans were just starting their day, and they were definitely not expecting the Japanese to attack, but they did. The Japanese planned a sneak attack at 6:05 a.m. Planes were taking off from the Japanese aircraft carriers, and they were flying to Pearl Harbor to bomb the American ships at Battleship Row. Altogether, 353 enemy planes were going to Pearl Harbor. Just before 8 a.m., the Americans see planes in the sky, but they think they were American planes doing drills. It was too late when the Americans noticed these planes were bombed. These planes were the Japanese, but they bombed in seconds. The Japanese planes dropped torpedoes that worked in the shallow water of the harbor. They also used submarines in the attack. During the battle, 2,335 military personnel were killed. Over 1,000 people were killed on the USS Arizona battleship. On December 8th, the United States declared they would join World War II on the side of the Allies. Back to you, Ella and Rebecca.
Wow, that's fascinating. I barely knew about the important event in history. It's so sad that 2,335 Americans were killed. Wow. Now let's hear from Rebecca and learn the tragedy of the Titanic.
Do you know how the Titanic sank? Hello, I'm Rebecca, and I'm telling you all about the Titanic. So on April 14th at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic hit an iceberg in the Atlantic Ocean. That caused the rivets to break and caused the water to go inside and make it sink. It was also 4 days into the journey to New York City. It took about 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. That gave the people enough time to get onto the lifeboats. The lifeboats only hold 370 people each, and they only had 20 lifeboats. So only about 706 survived the incident. The amount of people that were on the Titanic before it sank was 2,206 passengers. There were also some famous people on the Titanic. Let me name some of them. There were John Jacob Astor IV, Margaret Brown, the unsinkable Molly Brown, Benjamin Guggenheim, Captain Edward John Smith, and last but not least, Thomas Andrew. Do you know that about 100 years later, someone actually found the Titanic very deep on the floor in the Atlantic Ocean? Isn't that fascinating? Back to you, Ella.
That must have been such a sad day. I really feel bad for the people who died.
Now we have Ella talking about the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Do you think it'd be hard to build a fort out of soil and logs in the dead of night? Well, I do, and that's what happened on June 17, 1775, in Charleston, before the Battle of Bunker Hill. This hill is also known as Breed's Hill. It was the time of the American Revolution, and the British took control of Boston. Patriots went out in the dead of night and marched to Breed's Hill, because they found out the British made a plan to take over more of the area. The Patriots had Commander William Prescott. They were going to put a fort on Bunker Hill, but chose Breed's Hill because it was closer to Boston. The Patriots worked all night without light, making a fort out of soil and logs, and they were tired and hungry but ready to attack. The Patriots set up cannons on the hill so they could fire down at the British. The Patriots wanted the British out of Boston, and they could see the British below, and they were ready. The next morning when the British woke up, they were shocked to see the fort. The Patriots commander told the soldiers, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." The British marched up the hill, got shot at, and retreated. Major General Howe summed them back up, and they kept getting shot at. Then he tried a third time, and they made it up the hill. After a while, the Patriots ran out of ammunition, and they ran away. The Patriots lost 115 men, 30 were captured, and 305 were wounded. The British had 226 killed out of 2,000 men, and 828 wounded. The British won the battle and won the hill, but they lost a lot of men that day. I hope you know a lot about the Battle of Bunker Hill now. This is Ella, signing off. Back to you, Rebecca.
I can't believe that happened to them.
This time we have Bobby talking about the story of Iwo Jima.
Let's go back to February 19, 1945, when the Battle of Iwo Jima happened. Before I continue on, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Bobby. Iwo Jima was a battle in Japan on a small island. This volcanic island had a foul smell because all of the natural sulfur. The island was there for Japanese aircraft landing. The famous picture behind me was taken on Iwo Jima by Joe Rosenthal. The mountain they raised the flag on was called Mount Suribachi. There were 22,000 Japanese soldiers stationed there. They were waiting for the American soldiers to fly over on their way to Japan. Iwo Jima was one of the last major battles of World War II. The capture of this small island was important because the Americans wanted a place to land. The battle lasted 36 days. They thought it would only take 1 week, but the Japanese were hiding in 11 miles of underground tunnels. In this battle, about 6,800 American soldiers died and 18,000 Japanese soldiers died. I hope you enjoy learning about the Battle of Iwo Jima. Back to you, Rebecca and Ella.
I never heard of that battle before. That was so interesting.
Up next, we have Ava talking about the Boston bombing.
Hi, I'm Ava. Have you ever heard of the Boston bombing? Well, I'm going to tell you about this event. I'm doing this because I'm very curious about this event. It happened very close to New Hampshire, so why not find out? All of this happened April 15th, 2013 at 2:50 at the finish line. An explosion went off, then no longer than 6 seconds later, a second explosion went off farther down from the first. These two explosions killed 3 people. 2 days later, the two bombers, Zokhar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev, shot a police officer on duty as they tried to head to New York City to do more damage. 4 days later, the brothers were found in Watertown, Massachusetts, and then were in a police standoff. Tamerlan was shot and killed during the standoff. Zokhar escaped. He was found under a boat cover in serious condition and taken into custody. Later Zokhar was sentenced to death. Rest in peace, all the victims in this event.
I feel so bad for the families of the people who died and for the 264 people who were injured that day.
We now have Riley talking about D-Day.
D-Day was a key factor in the liberation of Europe. I'm Riley, and I'm here to tell you about Operation Overlord. But first, here's some background info on World War II. It all began in 1939 when the Nazi forces attacked poor Poland. The United States joined World War II in 1941 on December 7th. Operation Overlord was an attack on 5 beaches in Normandy on June 6, 1944, during World War II. Those beaches' special code names were Omaha, Sword, Gold, Juneau, and Utah beaches. The purpose of the attack was to get back into Europe after it was almost entirely taken over by Axis powers. Men from America, Canada, and the United Kingdom were loaded into box-like boats with no roofs and sent onto the beaches. The Navy hailed down shells onto the beaches first, and then bombers were sent, but the cold Normandy morning had fog and bad weather. Tanks were also dispatched, but most sank in the massive waves. These tanks were called Churchill Funnies and were made very quickly and were easily broken. Once the men got onto the beaches, they were met with heavy machine gun fire. The few men who got past the heavy machine gun fire had to get up to the seawall. They used long spear-like grenades to get rid of the barbed wire. Then they charged towards the bunkers and took them out. The battle was a success, but there were many casualties for both sides. This attack was one of the main factors in the final hours of World War II. Back to you, Ella and Rebecca.
I have never heard of D-Day, but I never knew anything about it. That event definitely helped World War II end. This is Ella
And Rebecca.
signing off.
Hi, welcome to WPUG. I'm Eden.
And I'm Ben, and today we have Ryan talking about the catastrophe of Hurricane Katrina.
My name is Ryan, and I will be telling you about an amazing hurricane that hit the United States in 2005. It was named Hurricane Katrina and was the deadliest hurricane in the United States since 1942. Hurricane Katrina went between being a Category 4 and 5. New Orleans, Louisiana was the worst hit. Hurricane Katrina was the largest and third strongest hurricane ever recorded to make landfall in the U.S. The death toll in Louisiana was 1,577 and 238 in Mississippi. More than half of these victims are senior citizens. Wind speed stands to determine the category of the hurricane. The southeast states along the Gulf Coast of Mexico built levees to prevent flooding from the ocean water in large rivers during storms. The levees are walls made out of dirt, rock, and also concrete that help stop water when the water level can rise above one level. Because Hurricane Katrina was a Category 4 and 5, the levees were built for Category 3. Many of these broke, which meant many cities and areas were flooded. People had to get out of their homes and go somewhere else. One place was the Superdome. There was limited supplies and the roof was slowly falling in on them. About 10,000 people went there because their homes were destroyed. There was even flooding on the field in the Superdome. Back to you, Eden and Ben.
Wow, that's very high wind speed. Though it would be kind of fun to be able to be blown away by all that wind.
Yeah, you would be able to fly.
Now Cole and Noah telling us about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Can you imagine the chaos right after Abraham Lincoln was shot? We're Cole
And Noah.
and we'll be talking about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. The assassination happened on April 15, 1865. Abraham was shot in his neck while watching a play at Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. He was shot by John Wilkes Booth with a Derringer pistol.
The president didn't die until the next morning. The doctor couldn't get the bullet out of his neck because it was in too deep. Abraham was 56 when he died. Abraham Lincoln helped stop slavery. John Wilkes Booth thought if he killed Abraham Lincoln, the North would lose control over the South. Booth's plan didn't work, and America lost a great president.
Cole
and Noah out.
Back to you, Eden, Ben and Eden.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine the chaos after that.
They probably couldn't get the bullet out because doctors weren't as knowledgeable back then.
Now let me tell you about the lost colony of Roanoke. Are you afraid of being lost? If you would be, then you would hate living in Roanoke, the lost colony. My name is Ben, and I'm here to tell you about Roanoke. Queen Elizabeth I told Sir Walter Raleigh to get more land for England, but he could never leave England himself. So he assembled a crew of 117 men, and they made it to the new land. Amadas and Arthur Bartholomew found an island off the coast of Roanoke and named it off the coast of Virginia and named it Roanoke. The colonists settled there and built a palisade around 20 houses, one church, and one marketplace.
They quickly made friends with the natives and had a big old feast, but all was not good when they lost a worthless silver goblet and, of course, blamed it on the natives. They went to the local tribe who they had thought stolen the goblet and burnt down their field of corn. That tribe became the colonists' first enemy. Later, the colonists were running low on supplies, and their only reliable source of materials was the natives, and they, the natives, were getting fed up with the colonists not helping get any more supplies. So those natives became enemies with the colonists. Sir Francis Drake went to Roanoke to bring them all back to England. Later, the Queen of England had to bring them all back. It had to bribe everybody to go back to Roanoke, and that bribe was 500 pounds and 20 acres of land. But they had to grow something on that land. I think that's a fair trade. Over 200 new settlers did go back to Roanoke, but they were still low on supplies. John White, the governor of Roanoke, went back to England to get supplies, and when he got back 3 years later, all he found was the word Croatoan, the colonists' only friends, on a tree, and a destroyed village. That's really spooky. I really hope you enjoyed this report on Roanoke. Now back to me and Eden.
Can't believe they got so angry over a missing silver goblet.
Yeah, they would have some serious anger issues, or they're just hoarders.
Yeah. Now let me tell you all about the history of stop-motion animation. Hi, my name is Eden, and I'm here to tell you about the history of stop-motion video. Stop-motion video is the initial way that people made entertaining videos. In 1912, the original stop-motion video was presented. The first to create this magical art was J. Stuart Blackton. Another was Albert E. Smith, who created Humpty Dumpty Circus. Then came Fun Bakery, Sculptor's Nightmare, and Miracles in Mud, and many, many more. In the 1800s to the 1900s, stop-motion used mostly clay. You needed to sculpt the characters and have lots of film ready to print. In the late 1900s, they invented stop-motion pictures, which was like the flip book, which was the very first way to make any image move. Stop-motion took over everything in the world of entertainment. People were able to animate their characters. Soon, all shows were clay and computer animation put together. This eventually created the world-changing computer animation of Star Wars, created by George Lucas. The world of entertaining was revolutionizing rapidly. Stop-motion is amazing. Many movies and shows have it, though nowadays the movies are just made by computer animation. But the art of claymation is not lost. Animators are hired to create models of the characters to animate. So that's how stop-motion video led to today's most popular entertainment. While computer animation is more popular in the 20th century, they still use figures to make them. Nowadays, they've created something called 3D printing. They can make images of the characters and print 3D models of them. When I grow up, I want to be an animator. One of the most successful studios in the world is Pixar Studios. They use 3D printing and make movies and videos. Sounds fun, right? Well, it is. Those who work at Pixar are very successful. So if you like sculpting clay characters, using stop-motion cameras to animate your characters, being an animator is the perfect job for you. Back to the studio with you, Ben. I didn't know they had to print all that film just for a little video. Well, Ben, they didn't always know what they said until they made the whole video. So a lot of film was good if you made a mistake.
I would definitely need a lot of film for all my mistakes.
That's not really how it works, but okay.
Now Emily will tell us about the tragedy of the Titanic.
Can you imagine the loud screams of the people as soon as they hit the icy cold water in the middle of the North Atlantic? That is what it was like at 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the calm ocean. I'm Emily, and today I'll be informing you about the disaster that shocked the world, the sinking of the RMS Titanic. They called the ship unsinkable, so this disaster was shocking. First, let's start with the captain. Captain Edward John Smith failed to pass on ice warnings to the crew and passengers of the Titanic. The ship was going so fast it had no time to turn and slow down when ice was sighted, so the ship broke in half and sunk. They had only 20 lifeboats, so they didn't have enough lifeboats for everyone. Some of these lifeboats were lowered when they could fit 50 more people, but people panicked and they had them lower the lifeboats too early. So back to Captain Edward John Smith. He ordered the crew to leave the sinking ship partially filled, meaning that half the ship was still full of passengers when it sunk. An interesting fact that the Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m. There's a clock on the ocean floor that's still sitting on the mantle that stopped working when the water hit it. Isn't it amazing that the clock still says that on the ocean floor? Pretty cool, right? When the ship was sinking, they let women and children on lifeboats first, but some people were honeymooning on the ship, so they let newlyweds on lifeboats first. So some male passengers made it on the lifeboats and were saved. The RMS Titanic is the only ocean liner ever sunk because of an iceberg. How's that for another interesting fact? Another fact that the last survivor of the Titanic just died in 2009. She was the youngest passenger on the ship. She was only 7 months old. The SS Carpathia came in around 4 o'clock, about 3 hours after the ship sank. 1,500 people died and around 706 survived. There were only 2 lifeboats with all passengers still alive when the SS Carpathia came. The ship was so big, when they looked down, all they saw was 12 lifeboats floating in the icy cold waters of the North Atlantic. It was a miracle that there were even enough lifeboats, considering that there weren't even enough lifeboats for everyone. Many people died from jumping from a sinking ship, which made it a miracle that some of them survived, because of how deep and cold the waters were. As the boat was sinking and the bow was pointing down, the chief baker was rushing out to the decks with breads, milks, and supplies for the lifeboats. Unfortunately, he was drunk and crazy, so he jumped from the ship, and because there were not enough lifeboats to climb onto, he drowned. Thank you for listening to my report about the Titanic. Now it's back to the studio.
Wow, I can't believe there's still a clock on the bottom of the ocean that tells the time when it sunk.
Yeah, maybe that's how fish tell the time.
Fish don't know how to tell time.
How do you know? That's all for WPUG. Have a nice day.
Hi, I am Mikey.
And I'm Ruth.
And
we are here from WGMI News. First up, Zane with his amazing story on the medieval times.
Do you know about the medieval ages? Well, I'm Zane, and today I'm going to tell you all about their lifestyle. In the medieval ages, there were different types of people. One of them were called peasants, who wore woolen and linen clothes and different types of hats. Depending on where they lived, they would live in different types of houses. In cold weather, they would live in igloos, and while traveling and moving their items, they would live in caravans. A caravan is a type of moving house pulled by a large animal. They had technology like the crossstaff and cannons. The crossstaff would tell them what time of day it was, while the cannons were for protecting their castles. Most people didn't have much schooling, but wealthy people usually did. The schools would include grammar school and church, though they didn't have any books because they were too expensive. There were also some foods that they ate, including rabbits, geese, pigeons, and trout, while they drank ale, water, and wine. Some of the most famous people from these ages would include Otto the Great and Alfred the Great. Everything you've heard today was about the medieval ages, and that was a great time in history. I hope you've had a phenomenal time. That's all I have for today. So back to you, Ruth and Mikey.
Wow, Zane, I didn't know they used cross staffs to tell time of day.
That is interesting.
Next up, Declan with his horrific tale of the Battle of Gettysburg.
Boom goes the can. The Battle of Gettysburg has begun. The Confederates wanted to push the Civil War out of Virginia, so they started to march towards Maryland. But the Union were chasing them, so they changed their route to regroup so the Confederates could beat the Union soldiers following them. They found a town with multiple roads going into it. That was Gettysburg. The battle raged for 3 days. Their transportation were horses. Their weapons were cannons, knives, bayonets, rifles, and swords. The Henry rifle was the most expensive of rifles, so it was just for wealthy soldiers. Food was basically a stale crackers, which most soldiers didn't like. Famous people include Robert E. Lee, who was the Confederate general, Commander Abner Doubleday, who also created the rules for baseball, George Pickett, who led Pickett's Charge, and Ulysses S. Grant, Union general. The clothes were different. The Union dressed in blue and the Confederates in gray. Experienced soldiers wore black hats and less experienced wore blue and gray. Almost 7,000 died altogether. It was the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. Lee retreated but never surrendered until later in the war. Thank you for listening to my information about Gettysburg. Back to you.
I'm glad I didn't just eat lunch.
Right? I just lost my appetite knowing it was the bloodiest battle of the Civil War.
Right after one sad event, we have more sadness as we learn about the Titanic disaster.
Did you know that the Titanic was 4 days into its crossing when it sank? My name is Nadia, and I'm going to tell you all about it. The first thing you should know about the Titanic is that it sank April 14th through April 15th, and it took about 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. The Titanic received 2 warnings. They did not get one, and the other the captain ignored. Another thing you should know is that there were a few famous people aboard the ship, including Margaret Brown, Edward Smith, the captain, and John Jacob, who was the richest man on board. Unfortunately, about 1,503 people died, but about 706 passengers and crew survived. One last cool thing is that there were 6 survivors who shared their stories. According to these survivors, the water was extremely cold, around 28 frigid degrees Fahrenheit. You could only live about 15 to 45 minutes in this 28-degree water. I've worked really hard on this, so thank you for listening. Back to you, Ruth and Mikey.
Wow, only 706 people survived and 1,503 people died?
That's horrible. But I guess it was Mother Nature's way of telling us not to think a ship could be unsinkable.
Now here's Grace's report on the discovery of penguins.
Hello, New Hampshire. This is Grace, and I'm going to talk to you about the discovery of penguins. Well, before we go into detail, do you know about the first person who found penguins? Well, you came to the right place. One of the first people who found penguins was Bartholomew Diaz. He was an explorer from Portugal. When Bartholomew Diaz found penguins, it was between 1487 and 1488, when he was sailing around the Cape of Good Hope on the southern tip of Africa. For millions of years, they were unknown creatures to most of the world. The natives of the southern hemisphere were already accustomed to seeing penguins. If I were Bartholomew, I would wanted to cuddle with one of the baby penguins. Would you?
Huh, I never knew that they were undiscovered for such a long time.
Well, explorers had never traveled that far south. Anyways, here's Ruth's facts on the Spartan life.
Have you ever wondered what life was like in ancient Sparta? I'm Ruth, and I'm here to tell you about Spartan life. Sparta is in Greece, by the way. This era took place between the 6th century and 464 BC. Many people think that Spartan means anyone born in Sparta, but actually Spartan means that you are a citizen in Sparta, Greece. Being a citizen is just one of 3 lifestyles in Sparta. The other 2 are Pyrrhiaci and Helots. A Spartan is a citizen, and they are not allowed to own gold or silver. They are also not allowed to leave the city without permission. They schooled both boys and girls, though the boys went to the Agoge, or the military school. There they were purposely not fed enough and expected to steal food. However, if they were caught, they were punished. I believe this was to teach them stealth, and how their lives could one day depend on it. I think this is rather unethical, because it could make the children angry at the Spartans. Also, it is rather hard to train soldiers when they are weak and hungry. The next choice are the Pyrrhiaci, who were merchants, and were allowed to own silver and gold. They lived right outside city limits. The men were expected to go to war for the Spartans, and if they didn't, they were banished from the city. Finally, there were the Helots, and they were like slaves. They worked the Spartan farms and got to keep half of all the food they grew. They were also allowed to choose who they married, and if they had kids, the kids were theirs, not their masters. In order to keep the Helots from revolting, the Spartans would kill up to 400 every 1 to 2 years. The last thing about the Helots was that if they got enough money, they could pay their masters to go to a different farm. The lifestyles of the Spartans was very intriguing, and that is why I decided to share this with you. Personally, out of all the 3 different lifestyles, I would like to be a Pyrrhiaci because they are not held down. Thank you for watching. Now back to you, Mikey.
Yikes, they killed up to 400 Helots every 1 or 2 years? That's a lot.
It was a vicious time. Finally, we have Mikey with the heartbreaking story of 9/11.
A plane zips into the World Trade Center. My name is Mikey, and I'm here to teach you about the horrific event of 9/11. You might know something about the Pentagon or Flight 93. Well, they're all linked in a way. Terrorists from around the world planned these attacks. The first 2 planes ended up crushing the Twin Towers, leaving thousands dead. The Pentagon was the 3rd attack, and that was a couple hours after the Twin Towers, too. A hijacked plane zoomed into the west side of this giant building. Also, that crash in Pennsylvania was on the same day, too. And no, the hijackers weren't being dumb when they crashed into a field. Passengers were fierce, and they were knocking down the door to the cockpit. Worried the passengers would succeed in stopping them, the hijackers crashed into a field. Prior to these deadly onslaughts, terrorists had attacked in 1983 with a truck holding a bomb inside of it. They drove into a garage at the bottom of the World Trade Center. Though smoke rose almost to the top, people evacuated casually. These were known as practice attacks. Thousands were lost in the 9/11 massacre, including the people that were never accounted for. The government blamed these onslaughts on Osama bin Laden, a terrorist leader in Al-Qaeda. I hope you enjoyed learning these facts, and if you want to learn more, you should study 9/11. Back to you, Ruth.
I never knew that the Pentagon, Flight 93, and the Twin Towers were all on the same day.
It was a sad day for all of us.
Our final and last story is from Faith and has to do with wolves.
Hi, I'm Faith, and I am here to share some facts about wolves. The gray wolves may be 3 feet to 5 feet long. Another fact, their tails are 1 to 2 feet. The gray wolves are endangered. Poor wolves. Well, they are mammals and carnivores. Gray wolves are the biggest member of the dog family. When the mothers have babies, the gray wolves become less endangered because the population increases. There are an estimated 7,000 and 11,200 wolves in Alaska. There are 3,700 gray wolves living in the Great Lakes region and 1,675 in the Northern Rockies. They are becoming extinct, and they are making a comeback. Let me tell you more about important facts about wolves. The puppies will choke on food when they are born, so they drink the mother's milk until they are old enough to eat their own food, normal food. Wolves eat big-hoofed animals like elk, deer, caribou, and moose, and not horses. They travel in packs of 8 wolves and more. Pups are born blind and defenseless. Wolves develop strong bonds between their packs. They weigh up to 190 pounds. Wolves are active. Back to you, Ruth and Mikey.
I didn't know wolves were so interesting.
I didn't realize they were endangered.
Thank you for watching. That's all, folks.
See you next time on WGMI News.